Jai Baba, good morning everyone.
Good
Good
morning, Jai
morning.
Baba,
Good
Shubh
morning.
Jai
Day.
Baba, good morning.
Jai Baba, Mamaji, how is everything? All fine?
Fine, okay.
Okay, so Ashok, you want to read How to Love God?
Yes, definitely.
Okay,
Avatar,
Jai Baba.
Baba
Go
ki
ahead.
Jai. How to love God. To love God in the most practical way is to love our fellow beings. If we feel for others in the same way as we feel for our own dear ones, we love God. If instead of seeing faults in others, we look within ourselves, we are loving God. If instead of robbing others to help ourselves, we rob ourselves to help others, we are loving God. If we suffer in the suffering of others and feel happy in the happiness of others, we are loving God. If instead of worrying over our own misfortunes, we think of ourselves more fortunate than many others, we are loving God. If we endure our lot with patience and contentment, accepting it as His will, we are loving God. If we understand and feel that the greatest act of devotion and worship to God is not to hurt or harm any of His beings, we are loving God. To love God as He ought to be loved, we must live for God and die for God, knowing that the goal of all life is to love God and find Him as our own self. Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai.
Jai.
Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai. So I think I'll start with a quick question or feedback. So how many people read Maya 1 to 3 this week? I didn't. I
Uh,
put my hands.
I did read and listen to it, but I found the
Mhm.
chapters very intense, and I have a couple of things to share as well as ask.
Okay, hold your horses. Sunil?
Yeah, I did. I read, but I don't mind rereading the whole Maya once again.
Okay.
So
Nomita, did you read? Did you read Maya 1 to 3?
Jai Baba, I didn't read.
Okay. Jayanti,
No,
you were
I
there
didn't.
last time.
Yeah, I
Okay.
was there, but I
Yeah.
completely missed it.
Okay. Soma, you weren't there, but then did you happen to read Maya 1 to 3?
No, I didn't. I wasn't there, so I wasn't aware.
Okay. So here's what I mean, I'm trying to fix the game. Sunil and I decided to read Maya again. So I'm trying to navigate the conversation there. So if everybody's okay, we will actually redo Maya 1 to 3. And maybe by end of our session tomorrow, we do Maya 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's not rush it, but if at all we get there, that's great. But at least let's go with no doubts. And like Ashok said, he has some more clarifications that he may want, and so would all of us. So maybe it would be sensible to do it slowly and do it again. Kama, what do you think?
Karthik, it's a brilliant idea, as far as I'm concerned.
Boss has to
I also
admit.
agree.
Boss has to.
Boss, the,
Boss.
the beats on single string, where is he?
Yeah, that
We are waiting
is.
Hey,
for approval.
what's the question again? Sorry.
Question is, we are going to read
No,
Maya
I know that
again.
we are going to. Yeah. So right now we are not. We have only finished 3 parts, so we have to finish the 4th part, and then I will tell
Oh,
you my suggestion.
okay, no, the question is different then. The question is, do we want to read Maya 1 to 3 again and then go to the 4th?
No, I would
Slowly.
suggest that we have finished number 1, 2, and 3, and let's
Hmm.
finish 4 now. And
Okay.
then my suggestion is that the chapters, according to me, okay, this is just a suggestion. The
Okay.
way I have looked at it after going through it thoroughly, I read it again this week. And what I feel is this notion was always there before, that the way it could be read right now is start with 4, then after 4 comes 2, okay, because that deals with false beliefs, okay. Then
Mhm.
you deal with part 3, which is transcending the falsehoods of Maya. And then you do part 1, false values. And I will tell you why. When you are looking at any subject, you go from the macro to the micro rather than micro to macro. So analogy is classical mechanics, the macro world, to quantum mechanics, micro world. So part 4, God and Maya, this is where I got the title. Even though the chapter discourses, in the discourses, Maya is the heading. When I divided the discourses into 7 subheadings, God and Maya is one of those. And it comes first in our discussion almost. And so I feel that if you are going to read it again, I will suggest that we read it in the sequence that I have just recommended, if that's
4,
okay
2,
with
3,
everybody.
1. Yeah, very good.
4,
I agree.
Very
2,
interesting.
3,
I
1.
I love 4. In fact, 4 is the only one I understand. Okay, very honestly.
Right,
So,
exactly,
so,
exactly.
so
Because it
I'm
is
all for
very,
it. I love 4. Let's do 4.
because
Then go
it,
ahead.
it is very technical in the sense that I noticed that, see, when you look at the word belief and values, first comes belief, and belief leads to values. Okay. And another interesting thing I noticed was when you're reading the false values part 1, just like we had different principles of, violence, different principles of, even of detachment, vairagya, which you will read in the next chapter, conditions of happiness. Here also in Maya, there are 3 principal forms of ignorance or falsehood. By the way, what I noticed was that this chapter is a little, the first 3 parts are complicated because of the ambiguity of the English language. The word falsehood also means ignorance, also means false values, falsehood, and so on. And Maya is the general term. So Maya means relating to falsehood, relating to illusion, as we know. So it is very interesting to note that whenever we talk about knowledge, right knowledge leads to right values, and false knowledge is because of Maya, and that leads to false beliefs. So there is a interesting correlationship out here between right knowledge and what are the categories, and that the 3 principal forms of ignorance, and ignorance is the opposite of knowledge. So the 3 principal forms of ignorances, what we saw on page 1, mistakes in valuation. This is also a falsehood, and meaning of Maya or falsehood or ignorance. Mistakes in valuation can be committed in the following ways, because it's easy to remember this: taking as important that which is unimportant, taking as unimportant that which is important, and giving to a thing an importance other than the importance it really has. All these falsehoods are creations of Maya. And later on, in one of the parts, I realized Baba calls it the principal forms of ignorance. So these 3 are the principal forms of ignorance. And what we are actually doing by reading Discourses and God Speaks is to find values actually in our day to day living. What are the values we believe in? And once you understand the values, are we able to implement it? So this whole 4 parts are very, very rigorous. So if we understand these 4 chapters well, Maya and God and Maya, I think we'll understand discourses completely. That is my opinion. Jai Baba.
Okay. I heard Sunil say something which I was not able to
Oh, no,
understand.
no, sorry. I think it was by mistake. I was muting, unmuting. But I completely agree with Kama. let's just finish the chapter 4 and then
Sure.
reread. Maybe
In that
yeah,
order.
fourth is the beginning. In fact, in that sense, fourth is already a beginning. Fourth in the new order, 4, 2, 3, 1. So let's
Yeah.
start with 4. So it's kind of rereading in that order from now.
Okay. Do others have any objection to that, or we can do that? Anyway, we are going to read 4 sequentially, but I agree with that too. So if anybody has any comments, jump in now, or we just go ahead and do that.
Karthik, no, we will go with 4, and I tried reading it twice. I found it very intense, and especially the part 1, that's false values, and some of the terms are get intermingled and has got more than one connotations. So yeah, it's a good thing. I try to understand, but it's good that we are doing it again, because I also felt that it was like very profound, very intense, and of course, a lot of takeaways. So I think rereading will be a very good exercise. Yes.
Okay, great. So let's do.
But Ashok, did you have any questions?
Okay. Questions. So I'll just keep the questions to you, but we can discuss it at the end, or we can discuss it now. See, it says to understand in part 1, false values. It says to understand Maya, or the principle of ignorance, is to know half of the truth of the universe. So, can we make an equation that the entire, if you make a full universal set, so truth of the universe is Maya, the principle of ignorance, plus God. So, Maya as principle of ignorance plus God, knowledge, or Maya as shadow plus real is equal to the total truth. That is one question. And then second question is, how do we correlate knowledge with...
Okay, let me first, because if you say all the questions, then I will forget, So let me answer
No,
the
no,
first
why
question.
not?
let's take the
Amma, why
questions
not we
when we go
read?
back. Yeah.
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 Some of it will get clarified by itself by rereading.
So let's do one thing. We finish chapter 4, part 4 now, and then after that we can start this process again. We can start all over. Yeah.
Fair point. Even I need to reread it. It's better to read.
See,
All
the
right.
reason why Karthik wanted everybody to read it again was when you're reading, you have questions, and you would have questions already noted down, and you would use that whatever questions you have in this forum. So you don't need to think, what questions do I need to ask? Jai Baba.
Fine, let's go ahead. Fine. Yeah. Fine. Okay. Jai Baba, I'm starting with Maya, part 4, 384, physical page number, part 4, God and Maya. Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai. God about duality. God is infinite because he is above the limiting opposites of duality. He is above the limited aspects of good and bad, small and great, right and wrong, virtue and vice, happiness and misery. Therefore, he is infinite. If God were good rather than bad, or bad rather than good, or if he were small rather than great, or great rather than small, or if he were right rather than wrong, or wrong rather than right, or if he were virtuous rather than evil, or evil rather than virtuous, or if he were happy rather than miserable, or miserable rather than happy, he would be finite and not infinite. Only by being above duality is God infinite. Infinite cannot be dual part of finite. Whatever is infinite transcends duality. It cannot be part of duality. That which is truly infinite cannot be the dual part of the finite. If the infinite is regarded as existing side by side with the finite, it is no longer infinite, for it then becomes the second part of duality. God, who is infinite, cannot descend into duality. So, the apparent existence of duality as infinite God and the finite world is illusory. God alone is real. He is infinite, one without a second. The existence of the finite is only apparent. It is false. It is not real.
So, Karthik, these two paragraphs are really profound. This actually means that when we use the adjective infinite, it is in the realm of reality. It means it's a part of the
Perfect.
reality, and it has got nothing to do with duality. You have to transcend duality to talk about infinity. The infinity itself is not a part of any opposite of finite. This is very
So it's further very beautifully explained. As I said, I just love this chapter. You will see how Baba defines what is infinity and our wrong idea of infinity if you go by math, and then he explains what the true nature of infinity can never be compared to finite, right? So these two paragraphs are good. Any question or clarification? There's more coming about this theme, so just hold on if you have any question.
Karthik,
Yeah.
the paragraph that you read, the last three sentences, I feel somebody needs to explain. It's a bit quite dense. I am unable to make out properly. God, who is infinite, cannot descend into duality. So the apparent existence of duality as infinite God and the finite world is illusory. As infinite God and finite world is illusory, God alone is real. So, what is the purport of this sentence?
So, Kama, you want to try? But basically, semantically, we are used to always treating finite and infinite as opposite ends of the spectrum, as aspects that are comparable. Baba, in these two paragraphs and beyond, is bringing out the fact that the true nature of God as infinity cannot be any way compared to what we know as finite. What we know as finite is only illusory. What we don't know is the infinity of God, is the point that's trying to be made here. Kama, you want to further clarify?
Yeah, Baba. The first line, whatever is infinite transcends duality. So duality is only happening in the waking state, number one. Number two, the word infinite or infinity is related to the seven realities. One of the insights I've got now, which I want to share with you guys, is whenever we are reading discourses or God speaks, whenever we come across the terminology or the words from the seven realities like existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, surrender, I think we should immediately grab onto it and ask ourselves, what does it really imply? How does it relate to our practical day-to-day life? How does it balance our mind and heart? And we also know that the first two realities, existence and love, these are all different aspects of God. Because in those two realities, we know God has been described as truth, infinity, self, and we have also added our own divine love. Of course, we know that Sachitananda or Brahman or even being, not becoming. Second point is that this particular, whenever you're reading about infinite, always refer to the chapter Spiritual Infinity of the Truth. So I don't have to waste time explaining everything here because the SIT, Spiritual Infinity of the Truth, explains clearly everything about infinity and finite and infinite aspect. Coming back to Doc Mama's question, God, who is infinite, cannot descend into duality. This can be explained in many ways. We know that God is infinite. That is a reality, one of the 7 realities. He cannot descend into duality because this whole universe is God's whim. The moment the most original whim happens, you have infinite consciousness, which is the eternal avataric infinite consciousness, correct? Who descends into the first drop soul, who becomes the avatar. We know that from beams. And infinite unconsciousness is all the drop souls like us, including Baba, right? Who went through this whole process of duality, evolution, reincarnation, involution, and realization. So God cannot descend into duality because it's his imagination, like the lover and the beloved. So the apparent existence of duality. Now the word apparent, very, very important, because everything that is happening to everybody in the world is all in God's imagination. The waking state is a divine dream of a higher degree than of the sleeping dream. So that is why the apparent existence, again, one of the 7 realities, as infinite God. So the apparent existence of duality as infinite God and the finite world is illusory. Because whenever you talk about God, there is only one self. We know that. But only when you come to creation, that is the most original whim, because this whole journey is about who am I? And we all know we are all walking Buddhas at a certain degree of consciousness. But we have to go through this duality because the world is a stage. The world is the phenomenal world of duality. So the first paragraph you read, the limiting opposites of duality, good and bad, small and great, right and wrong. And this also answers Ashok's question. What is half the truth? Knowledge has the opposite of, or ignorance is the opposite of knowledge. So when you say good, you have bad, and so on. So similarly, for every knowledge that you have, there is an opposite for it. So that is why there is a 50%, 50%. Because ultimately, we also have to transcend knowledge. Because knowledge is only a tool for Vivek and Vairagya. God alone is real, that is self-explanatory. He is infinite, self-explanatory, one without a second, because there is nothing like space-time in God's reality. Space-time is only during the waking state. The existence of the finite is only apparent, it is false, it is not real. So finite existence, because finite means temporary, and we know the universal law of nature is impermanence. Everything in the universe is impermanent. The only reality is God. And unfortunately, the word God has been abused. And we know God is basically the game of duality to get over duality. This is the whole technical game of hide and seek. Jai Baba.
Uh, Karthik, I may even want to point out to chart 1 and 4 of God Speaks, wherein there is a clear demarcation on chart 1 between the 6th plane and 7th plane. There's a demarcating line. So there's a different planes and worlds. So the world, the 7th plane and the world beyond that is different from the world between 1 and 6. That is one. And also again on chart 4, the Paramatma, the reality, is mutually exclusive to the part which is all illusion. So I think it's also explained in God Speaks that uh, the reality and duality are two different, uh, you know, different dimensions and two different, we can say, sort of planets, if you may say, or two different worlds apart. Jai Baba.
Mama, is that clear? You want? Yeah, go ahead.
So as we read this sentence, there is a sort of a confusion. So the apparent existence of duality as infinite God, unfinite world is illusory. So the infinite God, unfinite world is illusory in the apparent existence of duality. So what we feel of God being in Maya is also illusory. Is it so?
Mamaji,
Maya is the creator of illusion. Maya is the creator of illusion. It is not,
Okay.
Maya is not illusion. We have to be very clear on that. And the next paragraph, you will understand the exact definition of Maya. So Karthik, why don't you go ahead and read?
Okay.
Yeah. The next subtitle is World of Finite Things Created by Maya. So, how does the false world of finite things come into existence? Why does it exist? It is created by Maya, or the principle of ignorance. Maya is not illusion, it is the creator of illusion. Maya is not false, it is that which gives false impressions. Maya is not unreal, it is that which makes the real appear unreal and the unreal appear real. Maya is not duality, it is that which causes duality. Illusion of finitehood. For the purposes of intellectual explanation, however, Maya must be looked upon as being infinite. It creates the illusion of finitehood, yet it is not in itself finite. All the illusions created by Maya are finite, and the entire universe of duality, which appears to exist due to Maya, is also finite. The universe may seem to contain innumerable things, but that does not make it infinite. Stars may be countless, there are a huge number, but the total collection of stars is nevertheless finite. Space and time might seem to be infinitely divisible, but they are nevertheless finite. Everything that is finite and limited belongs to the world of illusion, though the principle that causes this illusion of finite things must, in a sense, be regarded as not being an illusion. Maya, not limited by space and time. Maya cannot be considered as being finite. A thing becomes finite by being limited by space and time. Maya does not exist in space and cannot be limited by it. Maya cannot be limited in space because space itself is the creation of Maya. Space, with all that it contains, is an illusion and is dependent upon Maya. Maya, however, is in no way dependent upon space. Hence, it cannot be finite through any limitations of space. Nor can Maya be finite because of any limitations of time. Though Maya comes to an end in the state of superconsciousness, it need not be considered finite for that reason. Maya cannot have a beginning or end in time because time itself is a creation of Maya. Any view that makes Maya a happening that takes place at some time and disappears after some time puts Maya in time and not time in Maya. Time is in Maya. Maya is not in time. Time, as well as all happenings in time, is the creation of Maya. Maya is in no way limited by time. Yeah, Ashok.
Can you read this 2 3 sentence again? It's very confusing.
Okay, so it's basically the space-time not being limited. I mean, Maya not being limited by space and time, right? So let me read the whole paragraph. Right? Maya cannot be considered as being finite. Do we agree?
Yes, yes.
Okay. A thing becomes finite by being limited by space and time. Maya does not exist in space and cannot be limited by it. Maya cannot be limited in space because space itself is the creation of Maya. Space, with all that it contains, is an illusion and is dependent upon Maya. Maya, however, is in no way dependent upon space. Clear till here?
Yes.
Hence, it cannot be finite through any limitations of space. Nor can Maya be finite because of any limitations of time. Though Maya comes to an end in the state of superconsciousness, it need not be considered finite for that reason. Maya cannot have a beginning or end in time because time itself is a creation of Maya. Any view that makes Maya a happening that takes place at some time and disappears after some time puts Maya in time and not time in Maya. Whatever event that we see in illusion is always in time and not, so that's the distinction here, right? Time is in Maya. Maya is not in time. Time, as well as all happenings in time, is the creation of Maya. Maya is in no way limited by time. Time comes into existence because of Maya and disappears when Maya disappears. God is timeless. God is timeless reality. Thus, the realization of God and the disappearance of Maya is a timeless act. Okay.
One suggestion, Karthik. I think that we should read the whole chapter, paragraph by paragraph, because even though questions might arise after reading each paragraph, sometimes those questions are answered in the subsequent paragraphs. So, for the because of time, as Baba said, time is very important in human life. My suggestion is, let's read the whole chapter, and people who have questions can note it down. And then we go back to each paragraph and try to answer those questions or dissect those paragraphs. Jai Baba.
Yeah, I agree, especially in this chapter because everything builds up and then you get a better clarity in the end, right? So let me continue. Maya as infinite, ultimately untrue. Nor can Maya be considered finite for any other reasons. If it were finite, it would be an illusion. And being an illusion, it would not have any potency to create other illusions. Thus, Maya is best regarded as being both real and infinite in the same way that God is usually regarded as being both real and infinite. Among all possible intellectual explanations, the explanation that Maya, like God, is both real and infinite is most acceptable to the intellect of man. Nevertheless, Maya cannot be ultimately true. Wherever there is duality, there is finitehood on both sides. The one thing limits the other. There cannot be two real infinites. There can be two huge entities, but there cannot be two infinite entities. If we have the duality of God and Maya, and if both are regarded as coordinate existence, the infinite reality of God would be considered as the second part of a duality. Therefore, the intellectual explanation that Maya is real does not have the stamp of final knowledge, though it is the most plausible explanation. Intellectual difficulty in understanding Maya. There are difficulties in regarding Maya as illusory and also as ultimately real. Thus, all attempts of the limited intellect to understand Maya lead to an impasse. On the one hand, if Maya is regarded as finite, it itself becomes illusory, and then it cannot account for the illusory world of finite things. Therefore, Maya has to be regarded as being both real and infinite. On the other hand, if Maya is regarded as being ultimately real, Maya itself becomes a second part of the duality of another infinite reality, namely God. Hence, from this point of view, Maya actually seems to become finite and therefore unreal. So, Maya cannot be ultimately real, though it has to be regarded as such in order to account for the illusory world of finite objects. Maya as God's shadow. In whatever manner the limited intellect tries to understand Maya, it falls short of true understanding. It is not possible to understand Maya through the limited intellect. It is as unfathomable as God. God is unfathomable, ununderstandable, so is Maya unfathomable, ununderstandable. Thus, it is said that Maya is God's shadow. Where a person is, there is his shadow also. Where God is, there is this inscrutable Maya. Though God and Maya are inscrutable for the limited intellect working in the domain of duality, they can be thoroughly understood in their true nature in the final knowledge of realization. The enigma of the existence of Maya can never be finally solved until after realization, when it is known that Maya does not exist in reality. Two states in which Maya does not exist. There are two states in which Maya does not exist. In the original unconscious state of reality, there is no Maya. And in the self conscious or super conscious state of God, there is no Maya. It exists only in God's consciousness of the phenomenal world of duality. That is, when there is consciousness of the gross world, or of the subtle world, or of the mental world. Maya exists when there is no self consciousness, but only consciousness of the imagined other, and when consciousness is helplessly dominated by the false categories of duality. Maya exists only from the point of view of the finite. It is only as illusion that Maya exists, as a real and infinite creator of unreal and finite things. This is a fantastic line. It is only an illusion that Maya exists as a real and infinite creator of unreal and finite things. Knowledge of realization. In the last and the only truth of realization, nothing exists except infinite and eternal God. There, the illusion of finite things as separate from God has vanished. And with it also has vanished Maya, the creator of this illusion. Self knowledge comes to the soul by looking within and by overcoming Maya. In this self knowledge, it not only knows that the different ego minds and bodies never existed, but also that the entire universe and Maya itself never existed as a separate principle. whatever reality Maya ever had is now swallowed up in the indivisible being of the one soul. The individualized soul now knows itself to be what it has always been, eternally self realized, eternally infinite in knowledge, bliss, power, and existence, and eternally free from duality. But this highest form of self knowledge is inaccessible to the intellect, and it is incomprehensible except to those who have attained the heights of final realization. Okay, I can see a lot of smoke. I can see a lot of silence. Anybody there?
So I think the final
We all
stamp
here.
is Maya is the shadow of God.
Perfect.
Should be the okay.
So in that sense, it is infinite. In that sense, but it is illusory.
Jai Baba.
Yeah, Numita, go ahead.
Uh, in all of this reading, one song comes to my head again and again. You alone exist. So
Yeah.
everything else is a bubble in a air. With a prick, it just dissolves in something which is permanent and always there, and that is God. And yeah, that's what I understand of it. Uh, Without really breaking my head, I feel it's as simple as that. That everything there is, which is permanent, is God. The rest of us come and go. We are just bubbles in the air. Jai Baba.
You suspend the intellect and you'll understand. With the intellect, you'll struggle like all of us.
No, but I don't have intellect. No, if I had, then I would have been also something.
Baba himself has said with the intellect, we can never understand Maya. So that's where we are
Yeah,
struggling.
yeah. So it's not. That's why, in absolute submission, you say whatever I see, whatever I do, whatever there is, it's just you. And once that there's no duality. I don't consider another. The real thing that is continuous, that doesn't finish, that cannot be seen, everything is God. So if that is that, that means I am also God, you are also God. So there's no duality. When there's no duality, then there are no questions. You are in that bliss and that absolute state of bliss in your heart where you see Baba. And we like to name that person, that beautiful feeling Baba. And it keeps us going. Jai Baba. That's all.
Simple as it may seem, we intellectuals are still struggling. Okay, others, questions. We can go back paragraph by paragraph. Any specific insights, questions? So it all leads up to the point, like Mama said, which is God. I mean, Maya is just a shadow of God. Where God is, Maya is. But God is the independent variable. Maya is the dependent variable, right? That is the key thing. And God is truly infinite. Maya is apparently infinite. God is real. Maya is the creator of illusion. Okay. Any questions? Ashok, Sunil.
I'm okay. I wouldn't have a question. Of course, there are many questions, but yeah, submission is better than questioning.
This is your time. Let's grapple with it.
The concept of shadow gives an idea that say whenever we see an object, we see the shadow also. So in duality, we have two things: the apparently visible thing, and then the shadow of that. So this is something like good and bad, evil, and all the opposites like that. So once this,
Are we seeing the opposites?
uh,
Are we seeing the opposites? Are we seeing the things through the green glass, which is the Maya?
yes, the principle of Maya makes you always uh, go do not go to the unitary valuation, but always weighs it against something else, so that you say this is big, this is small, this is good, this is bad, like that. Whereas as you grow further and the stage of self-realization, there is absolute existence, and so there is no shadow for that existence. So that is the realization phase. So when we think everything is existence alone, then there is no shadow for that existence. That is God realization. That's why Maya is a, I think, to understand Maya as the shadow of God is a real exercise we have to do. Kai Baba.
So one thought comes to my mind, Karthik, everybody.
Go ahead.
So like the shadow, the shadow can be when you are seeing a shadow of a person, it can be long or it can be distorted than the real thing. Similarly, we have when we go to a fair, we have mirrors which can distort the real. Uh, a person can look short, tall, or distorted. So that way, the Maya, this is the principle of illusion, creates distortion from the real because of many factors. So that could perhaps be an analogy from the real, from the world we live in. You know, the person is there, but his image gets distorted. Similarly, God is there, He's real, and Maya uh, creates an illusion, and we see things in a different perspective. Would that be a good analogy, or at least to
Very
understand?
good analogy.
Yes,
Pratik.
very good analogy.
Absolutely. That's about the valuation. Things
So
that are
I feel like
important.
Maya is also the one we created based on um, our
Imagination.
own perceptions and experience and expectations and so on. So we are Maya for that matter, because we like, I don't know, if I take myself, I don't know what my true nature is. Every time I read myself, I find myself to be little different. And the more I get knowledge, the more I deep dive into one aspect of myself, there is some other clarity which is quite opposite of what I was thinking about myself comes in. So in my mind today, Maya is the one who's leading the life because of my own past karma, sanskaras, experience, expectation, different people told something, external validation, all those criteria that I put in, and I created an image on everything that I live in. And so I do live in Maya. However, there is one voice which keeps saying that maybe this is not you, maybe this is not you, and I don't know what is me. So there is a struggle between the truth, and there is a struggle between the false image that I have created. Today I am in that stage, and tomorrow I may not be. But 10 years back or 5 years back, if I analyzed myself, I wouldn't have got the voice also saying that this is not true. I would have believed what I believed is the truth and lived and created the karmas also based on that. So
Very
I feel
correct.
like I am Maya. I am
So
Maya.
only thing is,
And there is,
semantically, the use of I am Maya or we are Maya is something that can further confuse, right? I generally accept all that
yes.
you said, right? But we have to enshrine what Baba has said on Maya, which is the principle of ignorance that it creates this illusion is Maya. So all of that
Hmm.
you said is being erected in front of your eyes, and when I say your, I mean your individualized soul. In your individualized soul's eye, what is erected in front of you is created by this Maya. So it's tempting
Yes.
to say I am Maya till I get to super consciousness, but let us not say
Huh.
it.
Okay, fine, got it.
Right.
Or the definition that I created for I today
Mhm.
is blinded by Maya.
Yes, totally agree.
Yeah. Yes, yes, yes.
Totally agree. Correct. That's better. Okay. So, any other questions? Or Kama, you want to summarize before we go ahead? To go back to 3.
Jai Baba, so since we have decided to reread, I think we have one less chapter to read because we have read part 4, unless we want to read it again. But I can quickly summarize. The first subtitle, the heading is God and Maya. So wherever there is God, and whenever we are awake, there is going to be duality. This is something just by reading now, I got this insight. When you are asleep, deep sleep, there is no duality. There is no God, there is no Maya. I am. The word God itself is being defined in so many different ways, but better word, as Doc Mama said, existence. I am existence. I am divine love. I am truth. I am infinity. I am self. I am being. I am Sachitananda. We all know that we are all walking Buddhas. And Baba has given the analogy of the sound sleep state related to the state 1, the Paratpar Parabrahma state, which is the divine absolute vacuum state, or the most original beyond God state, which can't be explained. And here also, we have read that God and Maya can't be explained or described by the human intellect. In God Speaks, it is said that even the perfect masters and avatars can only describe state 2, Paramatma state, but Paratpar Parabrahma state needs to be experienced. There are no words. And that is what we are. If we start from that self, from a top down approach. So when you're in deep sleep, 8 hours, 33% of the time, you're fine. So the challenge is the 16 hours. But again, Maya has created this illusion that I am suffering 24 hours. Nobody is suffering for 24 hours unless they are an insomniac. You can't sleep. If you are able to sleep, that is one beautiful aspect of nature that has given us this ability to connect to the state 1, Paratpar Parabrahma state, unconsciously. That is why you feel bliss, which is what is the nirvana state, or maybe the ordinary moksha state. Now, this chapter on a macro basis given us a definition about what is God and what is Maya. And again, the false belief system that we have been conditioned that Maya is illusion. Ask anybody. I have been conditioned by that. Maya is illusion. Now, we were all, at least I was so ignorant about what is the meaning of illusion. The whole world is illusion. This is all illusion. And when you apply that to your practical life, you say, why do I even do anything? Why should I take duties and responsibilities? I am an accidental tourist. Probably I'm an accidental birth for a lot of people. For a lot of people, it is like there's only one life. It's just an accident. But what we understand from the literatures and through physics, conservation of matter and energy, that nothing gets created nor destroyed. There is only one real birth and one real death. And that is the death of the ego. And the real birth is knowing that you are the self, which is what Nomita was explaining, that you alone exist. Is it possible for us to abide in that in the waking state? That is the challenge. So first of all, we have to remove this Maya of illusion that I'm suffering for 24 hours. I got to do this and that. No. If you have good sleep, which is totally dependent on the quality of your life in your waking state, you're already there. So the interesting thing is, how do we act intelligently? To me, we are all soap opera actors, at the moment we get up in the morning and playing in this cosmic divine drama called the lover and the beloved and so on. You can give it a romantic meaning, as Baba says, divine romance, or you can call it as a divine sport, or you can call it as a divine puzzle, depending on whether you're using Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga. And this chapter is very powerful because it tells us exactly, it gives us a punch in the gut that, hey, wake up. Even though we might call it delusion, but there is a reality to it because the reality is you, I, the self is there. There is no doubt about it. But we have given so many ego personality selves. We have so many multiple personalities and we have identified with it. So again, going back to the chapter on God man, the challenge is the false identification with the material body, gross, subtle, mental, and getting caught up in creation, which is the phenomenal world of forms, where here it is described as how does the false world of finite things come into existence? The moment you open your eyes, you become Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, the creator, preserver, and dissolver. And if we can think from that perspective, we are already in the journey. The important question is, when I'm watching this movie of life, am I also aware of the fact that there is a white movie screen behind the movie? When you watch TV, like Netflix and Star, whatever, Amazon, we are only watching the movie, but behind that is only dots. That is a form of illusion. So to be able to be self-aware simultaneously of the fact that when you're watching a movie, behind that is the white screen. The white screen is God, the reality, which is not dependent on Maya, because Maya, the movie, is dependent on God. Without God, the reality, there is no shadow. So shadow can't exist without God. So the analogy for me here is the movie of life is the Maya. Simultaneously behind that is the self, which doesn't change. The white movie screen in any part of the world, in any movie theater, whether it is the movie theater was open or closed, still remains the white screen. Similarly, every human being, whether he goes through 84 lakh or 8.4 million human cycles to attain liberation, moksha, the minimum state, which is guaranteed. And we know that, hey, we are that self, that white screen, that self that doesn't change, the divine ego, the realized self. Then I think we have probably started on our journey. And that is what this chapter is all about, that Maya cannot be considered as being finite. A thing becomes finite by being limited by space and time. And space and time is only in the waking state. When you go to sleep, there is no space and time. And it clearly says that time is in Maya. So instead of that, I say space and time is in Maya. Maya is not in space and time. Space and time, as well as happenings in space and time, is the creation of Maya. Maya is no way limited by space and time. Space and time comes into existence because of Maya and disappears when Maya disappears. That means when you go to sleep, the world doesn't exist. God is timeless reality, another definition of God. One of the seven realities, timeless reality. So there is only one self. I alone exist. I am, Nisargadatta Maharaj book, I am that. You don't even have to say that or this, I am. So if we can abide in that I am, which is in brackets, the capital real I self, or the divine ego, or whatever, thus the realization of God and the disappearance of Maya is a timeless act. So in a way, what we are reading out here is that in the end, the last lines in the last paragraph, the subtitle, knowledge of realization. What is a goal? What are we doing out here? Who am I? What's going on? Like Marvin Gaye's famous album, you got to listen to that. It's knowledge of realization. Why self-knowledge? Why not, things like Hold on. So the point here is that because we know that the real goal is realization, so the last line, the individual soul now knows itself to be what it has always been. I would call it individual soul self-consciousness. And this is what we were debating, thanks to Doc Mama, that the soul after self-realization is individualized. You have that independent entity without the limited mind. You have that infinite mind or universal mind in a universal body. So the individual soul now knows itself to be or not to be. Again, Hamlet. I call it to being enlightened or not to becoming ego, to be or not to be. And what it has always been eternally self-realized, eternally infinite in knowledge, bliss, power, and existence, and eternally free from duality. This is the reality that as a human being, you are this particular definition. But this highest form of self knowledge is inaccessible to the intellect. So, as long as the mind is there, which will only happen when Manonash happens, you're going to get that ultimate self knowledge. So, right now, we are in the journey. We are still doing our master's, bachelor's, or PhD. We have not got that self knowledge. And it is incomprehensible except to those who have attained the heights of final realization. So, what it summarizes out here is unless you reach self realization or God realization, which is fana phila, nirvikalpa samadhi, we are not going to understand Maya. Maya will only be a concept and a definition for the intellectual mind. Only after self realization, one will understand what is selfless service, what is complete surrenderance, what is Maya, and what is God. Jai Baba.
Great.
Thank you.
So before we wrap up, I'll just breeze through the subtitles again. If anybody wants any clarification or has any questions, we can take it. So we started with God being above duality, where the comparisons were made. Then you have the infinite cannot be the dual part of the finite. Then the creation of the world by Maya. So world of finite things created by Maya, which is also the definition of Maya, which is very important, which Maya being the principle of ignorance. Then this is a key concept, again, difficult to keep in mind, the illusion of finitehood. So whether Maya is finite or infinite is discussed here. And then he goes on to explain how Maya is not limited by space nor time. Then, but then he goes on and again says, though it is infinite, which we accept because it's not limited by space and time, it cannot be infinite as there cannot be a concept of two infinites. If God is infinite, truly infinite, his counterpart cannot also be infinite. So Maya as infinite cannot be true. Finally, the slap for all of us, intellectual difficulty in understanding Maya, so don't waste your time. And then the punch. Maya is best understood as God's shadow, right? And I think that analogy is very powerful. Please dwell on it. And the more you dwell on it, you will be able to relate better, I guess. And then two states in which Maya does not exist, which is the beyond and superconsciousness. And the paragraph, I think Kama explained very clearly in the end, the knowledge of realization. Any other questions, guys? Or we're all sorted?
Seems to have been sorted.
Sorted. Way to go. So let's go to 3. So I love this
chapter 2.
2. Sorry. Okay. So what's the order? 4, 2, 3, 1.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we start on page 375, part 2, false beliefs, shackles of Maya. The shackles that hold the soul in spiritual bondage consist chiefly of wrong values or falsehoods concerning valuation. Some falsehoods, in the nature of wrong beliefs, also play an important part in holding the soul in spiritual bondage. False beliefs implement false values, and they in turn gather strength from the false values in which the soul has been hung up. All false beliefs are as much creations of Maya as are false values, and they are used by Maya to keep the soul still in ignorance in its clutches. Intellect plays into the hands of Maya. Maya becomes irresistible by taking possession of the very seat of knowledge, which is human intellect. Surmounting Maya is difficult because, with the intellect under its sway, Maya creates barriers and upholds false beliefs and illusions. It creates barriers to the realization of the truth by persistent attempts to sustain and justify erroneous beliefs. The intellect that functions in freedom prepares the way to the truth, but the intellect that plays into the hands of Maya creates obstacles to true understanding. False beliefs may seem self-evident. The false beliefs created by Maya are so deep-rooted and strong that they seem to be self-evident. They take on the garb of veritable truths and are accepted without question. For example, a person believes that he is his physical body. Ordinarily, it never occurs to him that he may be something other than his body. Identification with the physical body is assumed by him instinctively without requiring proof, and he holds the belief all the more strongly because it is independent of rational proof. Identification with physical body. An individual's life is centered around the physical body and its desires. To give up the belief that he is the physical body involves the giving up of all desires pertaining to the physical body and the false values they imply. The belief that he is his physical body is conducive to the physical desires and attachments. But the belief that he is other than his physical body runs counter to accepted desires and attachments. Therefore, the belief that the individual is his physical body becomes natural. It is a belief easy to hold and difficult to uproot. On the other hand, the belief that he is something other than his physical body seems to call for convincing proof. It is difficult to hold and easy to resist. All the same, when the mind is unburdened of all physical desires and attachments, the belief that he is his physical body is seen to be false, and the belief that he is something other than his body is seen to be true. Identification with subtle body.
I have one observation, which of course others can also comment on. So this particular paragraph also can be read with another paragraph in part 1, taking as important the unimportant. Because we give so much of importance to our body and very seldom think about the soul, which is, sort of taking which is clothed by the body, that we identify ourselves with the body and we do not think about the inner soul.
Very good point.
And when we come to part one, we'll can also correlate on, which is on page 373, taking as important the unimportant. We can wait till then. I'm just saying that there'll be a
Yeah,
cross.
very correct. Very correct cross relevance. Identification with the subtle body. Even when a person succeeds in shedding the false belief that he is the physical body, he remains a victim of the false belief that he is his subtle body. His life is then centered around the subtle body and its desires. To give up the belief that he is the subtle body involves the giving up of all desires pertaining to the subtle body and the false values they imply. Therefore, the belief that he is his subtle body now becomes natural for him. And the belief that he is something other than his subtle body seems to call for convincing proof. But when the mind is unburdened of all desires and attachments pertaining to the subtle body, the person gives up the false belief that he is his subtle body as readily as he gave up the false belief that he was his physical body. Identification now with the mental body. This is not the end of false beliefs. However, even when a person abandons the false belief that he is the subtle body, he cherishes the illusory belief that he is his mental body. The person cherishes this false belief because he relishes it. Throughout his long life, as an individual soul, he has clung fondly to the false idea of his separate existence. All his thoughts and emotions and activities have repeatedly assumed and confirmed but one affirmation, namely the existence of the separate I. To surrender the false belief that he is the ego mind of the mental body is to surrender all that has seemed to constitute his very existence. Shedding the last falsehood. In surrendering the false belief that he is his physical or subtle body, it is necessary to surrender various desires and attachments. It is a giving up of something one has had for a long time. In surrendering the false belief that he is his ego mind, the individual is called upon to surrender the very core of what he has thought himself to be. To shed this last vestige of falsehood is therefore the most difficult thing. But this last falsehood is no more lasting than the earlier falsehoods that had seemed to be unchallengeable certainties. It also has its ending, and it is shed when the soul renounces its craving for separate existence. Soul is beyond thinking, desiring, and doing. When the soul knows itself to be different from the gross, subtle, and mental bodies, it knows itself to be infinite. As infinite soul, it does nothing. It merely is. When the mind is added into the individualized soul, it appears to think. When the subtle body is added onto the soul with the mind, it appears to desire. When the gross body is added into these, the soul appears to be engaged in actions. The belief that the soul is doing anything is a false belief. For example, an individual believes that he is sitting in the chair, but in fact, it is the body that is sitting in the chair. The belief that the soul is sitting in the chair is due to the identification with the physical body. In the same way, a person believes that he is thinking, but in fact, it is the mind that is thinking. The belief that the soul is thinking is due to identification with the mind. It is the mind that thinks and the body that sits. The soul is neither engaged in thinking nor in any other physical actions. Illusion that soul is the agent. Of course, it is not mere mind or mere body that does the thinking or other physical actions. For mere mind and mere body do not exist. They exist as illusions of the individualized soul, and it is when the soul falsely identifies itself with them that the thinking or the doing of things occurs. The soul and mental, subtle, and gross bodies taken together constitute the agent of actions or the limited I. But the soul, in its true nature, is neither responsible for thinking, for desiring, nor for actions. The illusion that the soul is the mind or the bodies, and the illusion that the soul is the agent of thinking, desiring, or actions are created by Maya, which is illusion and the principle of ignorance. I think this seals what me and Jayanti were talking earlier, right? This paragraph, illusion that soul is the agent. Right? Continue. Belief that the soul subject to dual experience. In the same way, the belief that the soul experiences the pleasures and the pains of life or is going through the opposites of experience is also false. The soul is beyond the opposites of experience, but it does not know itself as such. And so it takes on the experiences that are characteristic of the opposites because of identification with the mind and the subtle and gross bodies. The soul that is mixed up with the mind and the bodies becomes the recipient of pains and pleasures. Thus, all the pleasures and the pains that one is subject to are rooted in ignorance. When an individual thinks that he is the most miserable person in the world, he is embracing an illusion that comes into existence through ignorance or Maya. He is really not unhappy, but imagines that he is unhappy because he identifies himself with the mind and the bodies. Of course, it is not the mind by itself or the bodies by themselves that can have any experiences of the opposites. It is the soul and the mind and the bodies taken together that become the subject of dual experience. But the soul, in its true nature, is beyond the opposites of experience. Nature of ensoulment of mind and bodies. Thus, it is the mind and the bodies together that constitute the agent of activities and the subject of dual experiences. However, they do not assume this double role in their own right, but only when they are taken along with the soul. It is the mind and the bodies which are ensouled that together become the agent of activities or the subject of dual experience. The process of ensoulment is based upon ignorance, for the soul in its true nature is eternally unqualified, unmodified, and unlimited. It appears to be qualified, modified, and limited through ignorance or the working of Maya. Okay.
Jai Baba. One thought that kept coming to my mind is we read somewhere, and I can't remember where, that we need to use Maya to break the shackles of Maya. Anybody remembers this? I can't remember where we read this. Kama? Did I
Yes, that's
remember that?
correct. You're
That's
right.
correct, right?
I think your Maya is used as a tool, just like mind is a tool. The mental body is a part of the process of evolution because the mental body doesn't exist at the rudimentary state. It starts to evolve. So, similarly, what you're saying is correct. Maya is a means to go through illusion because it is the creator of illusion. The illusion is the false, as Baba is defined as the false world of finite things. So the false world of finite things need to be traveled um, because it is Maya. And so through Maya, we transcend Maya. Just like
Right.
the mind is like a thorn, where you use a thorn to remove another thorn. So, yes, you're right. Yeah, Baba.
Thank you, Jai Baba.
The as the soul is say ensouled by the body, subtle mind, everything, to transcend to the unitary soul stage, we need to travel through this path alone and then discard them and then remain as a single soul. So, in Sri Ramakrishna also gives an example of when you want to reach the top of the building, you need a ladder. So, but once you have reached the top and you are not going to come down or anything, there is no need for the ladder. So, that's why we need Maya to transcend Maya. But once we reach that pinnacle of the sixth to the seventh plane, there is no need of any scaffolding. You are already there. So that's how we can look at it. Maya is needed to transcend Maya. Hey, Baba.
Yeah, that's a
Perfect.
similar analogy we took in the explanation of ego.
Ah,
Yeah. So we have three things that fit that analogy. So right now we have mind. So mind could also be ego mind in that sense, Sunil. So two or three is
Yeah,
debatable.
right.
Mind, ego, and Maya are all subject to this analogy of scaffolding, of pole vault, of climbing the
yes.
ladder and then not needing it. So that's something to register, right? So ego, mind, as well as Maya.
Mm. So Maya as a principle is not the illusion itself, it's the one that creates illusion. Ego mind is uh, something that we all have within this circle of Maya, and we use the ego mind or ego to transcend through the illusion that is created by Maya. I don't know if it's a little bit more apt definition, but anyway, random thoughts. Jai Baba.
Uh, can
Yeah,
anyone
this
give some better graphic examples of the subtle body? How do we understand the subtle body in this gross sphere where we are living? Because actions are dependent on the gross body, but the feeling or the emotions they come only in the subtle sphere, I think. Am I correct?
Subtle is nothing but, like, this is my understanding. Subtle is nothing but the energy feeling or energy understanding. Like, for example, if somebody is unwell, or somebody is sick, or somebody is dead, if you are going around that house, you will feel that energy of that entire environment, either in your body or in your heart, even though you are not related to that person. That energy understanding is the subtle one.
So
It
it's
happens like when you go to a temple, you find some kind of a blissful feeling. It is not that temple is giving blissful feeling as a prasad or a satisfaction or a happiness or something as a prasad, but then you feel it in some temples. So that inherent understanding or knowing or feeling it in your heart or beyond explanation is what the subtle.
Yes.
Yeah, one example that I read somewhere in a book was, suppose you are very tired and it's late in the evening, you have had your dinner and somebody drops in your home. How do you feel actually? And then you are not ये कहाँ से आ गया type and then suppose it happens to be a very old or close friend of mine whom you have missed for very long. Where does that energy come from actually? I think that is what is subtle. To me, a very simple example that I kind of try to relate. Yeah. Jai Baba.
Yeah, it is the same thing like if you go to a satsang, you come back with
Yeah.
that with a nice feeling. It's not that somebody induced something into you, but then that nice energy upliftment that you get it with some people who are around is what subtle is.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Jai Baba,
Yeah.
just to answer Doc Mama's question, the material body are three, as we know: gross, subtle, mental. And as we read in this particular chapter, in paragraph in page 377, when the soul knows itself to be different from the gross, subtle, and mental bodies, and what we mean is the soul's super consciousness, you can call it. Consciousness is going through it. The soul knows itself to be infinite. As infinite soul, it does nothing, it merely is. We know God is, the self is. When the mind is added onto the individualized soul, mind means mental body, it appears to think. So the first thing that happens when we get up in the morning is thoughts. So what happens is that thinking is of the mental body. When the subtle body is added onto the soul with the mind, which is the mental body, it appears to desire. What appears to desire? The soul's consciousness, the drop soul's consciousness appears to desire with the subtle body. With the mental body, it appears to think. When the gross body is added onto these, which means is added onto the mental body and the subtle body, the individualized soul consciousness appears to be engaged in actions, which should be read as engaged in deeds. Again, the ambiguity of the English language. In spiritual parlance, action of thoughts, action of words, action of deeds, all are different kinds of actions which we know create different kinds of impressions or sanskaras, weak, strong, and powerful. So, relating to the subtle body, which has to do with energy, we know that it also has to deal with EDF, emotions, desires, feelings. So, the subtle body can be looked upon as the energy aspect, which is where when the sanskaras, when we react to our sanskaras, it comes from the mental body in the form of thoughts, good or bad thoughts. Then there is a feeling about how you use those thoughts in your subtle body, the energy body, the desire, the feeling. Hey, the doc said I have sugar problem, but I desire to eat. So the thought comes, you look at a sweet shop, you see something which is desirable, the emotions come. And that is when you have to use your Vivek and Vairagya. Do I convert that emotions or feeling or desire to the gross action of deeds? So this is the free will power of choice. Jai Baba.
Hey, Baba. Thank you.
Okay, so I think with that, we can wrap up and get back together and go to a second read of the chapters 1 and 2 tomorrow, parts 1 and 2 of Maya. And feel free to read these 2 chapters again and make a note of any questions, and then we can come back. So I think, yeah, any other questions before we go?
I would just remind you to look at the first 2 paragraphs of this part 2, false beliefs, which gives you different definitions of false belief, which is talking about the wrong values or falsehoods concerning valuation. And this is what we will be reading in the 4th part, how false beliefs. So this chapter that we read, some falsehoods in the nature of wrong beliefs, which is basically false beliefs, also play an important part in holding the soul in spiritual bondage. False beliefs implement false values. So we see here false values are dependent on false beliefs, and they in turn gather strength from the false values in which the soul has been hung up. This is like spending sanskaras, doing unintelligent action. All false beliefs are as much creations of Maya as are false values. So first comes Maya, the macro aspect, the creator of illusion. From Maya comes the false beliefs, and from false beliefs we create false values, which then keeps us in the cycle of samsara.
This what Kama told now can be looked at the micro and the macro level itself, from the point of view of each individual self, and also at a different level, the emergence of so many religions and all that. So they started some belief and then build a value system around that, and then that becomes an enshrined way of thinking itself. So maybe that is also built around this pivotal point, I think.
Very interesting, but correct. Very true. It builds up, becomes stronger, like Baba says, and then, but it's basically built on a belief and a wrong value. Yeah.
Yes.
Very nice.
One more
All right.
point is, one more point
Sure, go
is the three subtitles: identification with the physical body, subtle body, and mental body. This is again page 278, where we read on Man God Part 2. I'm repeating again, the false identification with the bodies. This is a perfect example that has been given here. And getting caught up in creation is another form of Maya. So this relates very beautifully with that chapter in Man God Part 2. Okay, Baba.
Okay, correct.
Jai Baba.
You
Yes,
alone
Nandita.
exist, Namita. Go ahead.
What did Baba say for us at the Samadhi?
For us, he said, we're not serious, we're fooling around, numbers are dwindling, kick butt, get everybody to get serious, time's running out. That's what he said.
And what did you say?
I said, I'll try, Baba. It's a very complicated crew. Karma's not working. It's very difficult to get these guys. So, by the way, Nomita is talking about my visit to Mehrabad. For those of you who didn't understand, I was in Mehrabad on 7th. So
you had the darshan.
very
Yes.
different darshan, but yeah. So you might have already seen the photographs and everything. So they have this mesh at the threshold, and you have to go up to the threshold and stand, and that's it. But there was hardly anybody, but it was nice to be back. It was really nice to be back, and the accommodations had not opened, so I stayed in a very nice studio apartment. Thanks to Kama's message on the group, I recommend that place if anybody is looking to go as well, because it's, I mean, well done, clean and neat, and a longish walk from the Samadhi. But then if you have vehicles, you'll not have a problem. So it's near MPC, on the far side of MPC, and it's a studio. So actually, 3 people can comfortably stay in it, and it was very nice.
Karthik, where exactly is that?
It's for those of you who know Ramesh Jangale, the trustee's home. It's next to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll probably put the details on the group.
It
For
is near
everybody's benefit.
MPC, not MPR, right?
MPC.
Lower Mehrabad.
Lower Mehrabad. After,
Okay.
so for those of you who know the cemetery, the trust cemetery,
Yeah.
the crematorium, after that.
Yes.
So after that, you make a left. So there's a medical store and all of that, and it's past the Arangaon right. So then you take a left, and it's just there. It's about 2 minutes from.
Okay. Arangaon bus stand on the left side, I think. There,
Oh, uske pehle. Arangaon bus
between,
stand is
yeah.
there.
Understood.
Just there. Yeah. But
Understood.
there's a very clear marking. I have a Google pin.
Yeah.
And
I think
this is
Krishna
fully
also
furnished.
used to stay in that area. Krishna, you remember, no?
Oh, okay.
Baba, yeah. He also was around that place. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a person by name Chandramohan Sethi. I'll put out the details in the telegram.
Okay.
So this studio has like 2 bedrooms and a sofa cum bed outside.
Oh.
AC, fridge, gas. So if you want to stay long, it's really cool. Right? So given all the rules that NPR has put out, I think we need to look at alternates anyway, because after your first visit, you'll never get another chance, I think, for a while. They are limiting it to 3 nights at a time. And after you're done it once, to get another chance, you have to be waitlisted against people who have not done it before. So it's a pretty complicated process. That's what's been put out now, but things can change.
Karthik, may I ask, what is the cost of the studio apartment?
1,200 rupees a night, 15,000 a month.
Okay.
All right.
Jai Baba.
Bye-bye.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Love you
Jai
all.
Baba.
Jai Baba.
Thank
Baba.
you.
Karthik, please upload last week's sessions.
Yes, I will.
Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Today.
Jai Baba.
Thank you. Jai Baba.
Thank you.
Jai Baba.
Jai
Bye-bye.
Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.